It started with a sound, a quiet, broken whisper pulled from the edge of space, a message that wasn't supposed to exist. At first, the scientists at the Terran Deep Listening Array thought it was static, just another false positive lost in the noise of the galaxy. But when they cleaned the signal, when they slowed it down and layered it through translation software, every heart in that room froze. It wasn't a random code. It was a cry for help, and it came from human voices. The words were distorted, filled with fear and desperation. "Please, anyone, they're taking the children." That was all. No coordinates, no explanation, just a single transmission that cut off mid-sentence. For days, no one said a word about it. The data was locked behind government firewalls. Reports vanished. But secrets like that don't stay buried long, not in an age where every corner of the galaxy is connected. When the truth finally leaked, Earth changed overnight. The story spread across every channel, from underground networks to the great media rings that wrapped around Mars. People demanded answers. How could there be human children out there, beyond Earth, beyond colonized space, begging for rescue? We had always believed humanity was alone among the stars, or at least the only species bound by empathy. But as more fragments of the message were decoded, a darker reality began to emerge. Those children weren't lost colonists. They were slaves. The idea hit like a tidal wave. Somewhere out there, in the vast silence between worlds, humans, our own kind, were being traded, owned, and worked to death by alien hands. The governments denied it at first, calling it conspiracy and cosmic paranoia. But then, the footage appeared. Smuggled out by a merchant ship crossing a forbidden trade route near the Orion border, it showed cages, rows of them, small figures huddled in dim light, their faces pale and thin, eyes wide with the kind of fear no child should know. That was the moment the galaxy began to burn. You could feel it in the air, an anger older than nations, older than history. It wasn't just outrage, it was vengeance. Every human heart, from the crowded domes of Luna to the floating cities of Europa, pulsed with the same thought. Never again. We had spent centuries reaching the stars, believing cooperation and peace would define our future. We had joined the Galactic Council. We had followed their rules. But when we saw what they had done to our children, all of that fell apart. The first retaliation came from a small fleet of miners from Ceres. They weren't soldiers, just workers armed with old fusion torches and cargo drones. They tracked one of the slaver convoys through the asteroid belt and tore it apart. Every escape pod, every signal buoy, gone in a single burst of white fire. When Earth's authorities tried to arrest them, public support exploded in their favor. The people didn't see criminals. They saw heroes. The governments hesitated, but the people didn't. Volunteers flooded recruitment centers. Engineers reactivated old warships that hadn't flown since the early colony wars. Scientists turned research stations into weapons labs. Humanity had always been underestimated. By the aliens, by the Council, even by itself. But nothing unites humans like the sight of their children in chains. And while Earth prepared for war, the rest of the galaxy watched in silence. Some species whispered warnings, trying to calm the storm. Others quietly erased their records, pretending they'd never known about the trade. But a few, the guilty ones, armed their fleets. They thought humans were still the naive newcomers of the outer spiral. They thought we'd beg for justice instead of taking it. They were wrong. The first strikes were surgical, almost restrained. Patrol ships vanished near the borders of known slave worlds. Then communication networks began to fail. Supply routes burned. The slavers realized too late that humanity had changed the rules. We weren't just fighting for territory or power anymore. We were fighting for something far deeper. The right to protect our own. In the heart of the chaos, there was one ship that became the symbol of it all. It wasn't the biggest or the most powerful, but it carried a message stronger than any weapon. Its crew called themselves the Children's Fleet. They weren't soldiers by birth. Some were teachers, some parents, some who had lost everything to the trade. They carried no flag, no command structure, just a shared vow: find them, free them, burn every chain. No one knew exactly who led them. Some said it was a mother who had seen her child taken in the first wave of abductions. Others whispered it was a soldier who had deserted when the government refused to act. Whoever it was, they moved like a ghost across the stars, appearing at slave auctions, hijacking transports, leaving behind liberated survivors and wreckage. Their broadcasts spread like wildfire across every human world. For every child you take, we will take a world. The Galactic Council finally broke its silence. They called humanity a rogue civilization. They tried sanctions, blockades, even threats of planetary isolation. But it was too late. By then, the fire had already spread. Colonies refused to follow orders. Merchant guilds rearmed their fleets. Even the peaceful enclaves of Neptune turned their research satellites into defense grids. For the first time in history, every human world stood as one. And still, the cries from the dark didn't stop. More evidence surfaced. Proof that the trade had been going on for decades, hidden beneath bureaucratic treaties and alien laws. Some of our closest allies had known and looked the other way. They called it necessary equilibrium. They said humanity's expansion had to be limited, that our numbers were too great, our ambition too dangerous. So they took our children. They made sure we'd never grow strong enough to challenge them. But they forgot what kind of species we are. We might argue. We might fight each other. But when someone hurts our own, especially our children, there is no limit to what we'll do. As the fleets gathered at the edge of Council space, the stars themselves seemed to dim. Whole systems went dark as human ships jumped into orbit, cutting through enemy defenses like fire through paper. There were no speeches, no declarations, just silence and resolve. Then came the broadcast, the one that would echo across galaxies for centuries. A single voice, calm but unyielding, transmitted on every known frequency. This is Earth. We have found our children. And somewhere out there, on a dying world deep within the Orion sector, the slavers heard the message and knew their time was over. The sky above them glowed red as the first human warships appeared in orbit, their engines burning like vengeful suns. The galaxy would never be the same after that day. Some said we went too far, others said not far enough. But no one ever forgot the moment humanity stopped being the quiet newcomer among the stars and became something else entirely. Because when Earth found out about the enslaved children, it didn't just rise. It roared, and the galaxy burned. The transmission faded into static, the stars fell silent once more, and in the empty dark, something waited, something that wasn't finished. In the weeks that followed the first retaliation, the galaxy seemed to hold its breath. Every station, every trading port, every quiet colony on the edge of nowhere felt the shift in the air. People whispered that Earth had crossed a line, that humanity had become something new, something the older civilizations no longer understood. But beneath the fear, there was also hope. For the first time in generations, humans were united not by survival, not by politics, but by purpose. Still, the story was bigger than anyone imagined. The captured children were only part of a much deeper system, one that had been running for centuries in the shadows of interstellar law. It wasn't just slavers or pirates. It was an entire network buried under the trade routes and council treaties, built on silence and profit. No one knew who had started it or how long it had existed. Some said it began before humans even discovered faster-than-light travel, when our first explorers disappeared and were never heard from again. The records were hidden well. Every clue led to another dead end, another erased file. But one name kept surfacing: the Syndicate of Orpheon. No one knew exactly who they were, only that they operated in the gaps between civilizations, moving people, weapons, and information across borders that didn't exist on any star map. The few who spoke their name in public were quick to vanish, and those who tried to investigate too deeply never came back. Earth's intelligence networks began to dig anyway. Old alliances fractured under the weight of the truth. Some alien governments quietly reached out, offering information in exchange for protection. They feared the syndicate as much as humanity did. But even with all their help, one question remained. Why humans? Why the children? What made us worth the risk of angering an entire species? That question haunted the people who had seen the transmissions. It haunted the soldiers preparing for war, and it haunted the crew of the children's fleet most of all. They had freed dozens of captives by then, but every mission uncovered something worse. The children weren't just slaves, they were being used. Not for labor, not even for experiments. Their memories, their dreams, their emotions were being harvested, stored in strange crystalline machines that pulsed like living hearts. No one could explain what they were or what they did. But the aliens who owned them paid in blood to keep them secret. One of the rescued children, barely 12 years old, said she remembered bright lights and a cold voice speaking in a language she couldn't understand. "They said I was useful," she whispered. "They said my dreams made them stronger." That line spread like wildfire through human space. Stronger. What did it mean? Scientists on Earth studied the recovered devices and made a chilling discovery. The crystals contained fragments of human consciousness, pieces of memory, fear, love, and pain, somehow extracted and refined into energy. It wasn't physical power, but something deeper, something that resonated with the mind. The aliens called it soul light. To them, it was a rare and potent resource, one that could only come from a species capable of deep empathy. That was the real reason humans were taken. We weren't being punished. We were being harvested. Once that truth spread, the fires of vengeance grew hotter. The old council orders meant nothing now. Humanity realized that the galaxy had seen us as resources, not equals. Every peaceful treaty, every diplomatic promise suddenly felt hollow. The same species who had smiled and shaken hands with our ambassadors had known about the trade. They'd turned their eyes away because it benefited them. And now, the humans who once built alliances were building fleets. But not everyone agreed with the rising war. In the middle of the storm, a few leaders on Earth still believed there was another way. They wanted negotiation, justice through the council, proof and trial instead of destruction. One of them was an old diplomat who had once brokered peace between two rival worlds. He warned that vengeance would only make us the same as those we hated. "If we burn everything," he said, "we might win. But what will be left of us?" His words fell on deaf ears. The people didn't want patience anymore. They wanted answers. They wanted to see those responsible brought into the light. As the fleets advanced, rumors began to surface of a world hidden beyond the mapped sectors, a fortress planet where the syndicate's leaders operated. It was said to be protected by ancient defenses, a place no one had entered and lived to tell the tale. The coordinates were a myth, changing from one story to the next, but the children's fleet claimed they had found it. The ship's transmissions grew more frequent, more desperate. They spoke of strange signals in deep space, coded patterns buried in the cosmic background. Some believed the syndicate was using these frequencies to mask their operations. Others thought it was something worse, something alive. The messages were often cut off, replaced by static or strange, echoing tones. No one knew if it was interference or a warning. On Mars, scientists began studying those same signals and found something terrifying. The patterns weren't random. They were identical to the brainwave readings taken from the rescued children. Whatever was transmitting out there wasn't just using human thoughts. It was speaking with them. That revelation changed everything. It meant that somewhere, someone, or something was connected to every child that had ever been taken. The search turned frantic. Human fleets pushed further into unexplored regions, burning through resources and allies alike. The Council demanded they stop, but their words no longer carried weight. Humanity had outgrown its leash. They called us reckless, emotional, dangerous. But the truth was simpler. We had finally learned the cost of silence. The deeper the fleets went, the stranger things became. Ships reported ghost signals, voices whispering through the static in English, crying, laughing, or calling out names that no one aboard recognized. Some captains claimed they saw shadows move across the stars, shapes that didn't belong to any known species. A few even swore that the stars themselves dimmed when they entered certain sectors, as if the universe didn't want them to see what lay ahead. Every mystery led back to the same point on the map, a dead zone between two collapsing nebulae known as the Hollow Veil. No one had ever charted it, not even the Council. Every probe sent into the region disappeared without a trace, but the Children's fleet went in anyway. For weeks, there was nothing but silence. Then one night, every human receiver in the outer colonies picked up a single, chilling message. A child's voice, soft and trembling. "We found the light. It's calling to us." Then static. The fleets tried to trace the signal, but couldn't. The Hollow Veil swallowed everything. It was as if that part of space had simply vanished. Yet strange things began to happen across human systems. Dream patterns changed. People reported hearing faint whispers at night, seeing flashes of places they had never been, alien cities, cold metal corridors, bright blue skies that weren't Earth's. Scientists said it was mass hysteria, but no one truly believed that. Something had reached back from the dark, something that had touched every human mind. On Earth, panic spread quietly. The government locked down communication with outer colonies. Military channels went dark, and in that silence, the diplomat who had once warned against war stood at a window overlooking the old oceans and whispered, "We've woken something that was never meant to be found." No one knows what happened to the Children's fleet after that message. Some say they were lost forever, consumed by whatever force hid in the Hollow Veil. Others claim they broke through and found the Syndicate's world, a place built from the remains of stolen civilizations. But there was one rumor that no one could dismiss. A trader ship drifting through the far rim reported a faint signal weeks later. It was weak, buried under layers of static, but it was unmistakably human. The voice was older now, but calm. "We were right," it said. "The children weren't taken. They were chosen." And then the signal ended. The galaxy hasn't been quiet since. Fleets continue to vanish. The stars flicker in strange patterns. Some say the war is only beginning. Others believe it already ended, and we just haven't realized it yet. But one thing is certain. Earth's vengeance lit more than just a war. It woke something ancient, something that had been watching humanity long before the first child cried out for help. And now, it's watching still. Across the wide expanse of human space, the stars no longer felt like symbols of hope. They were reminders, bright, distant witnesses to what had begun. The war for the stolen children had grown into something far greater, a storm tearing through every known corner of the galaxy. And in the center of that storm, no one was sure what they were fighting anymore. On the outer colonies, life had become a mix of pride and fear. The people supported the war, yet every day they watched more ships leave and fewer return. Families hung old Earth flags in their windows, a quiet symbol of unity, but in their hearts they knew this wasn't a simple fight for justice anymore. It was a hunt, and humanity had never been more dangerous. One of those who felt the weight of that change was a captain named Ellen. Her ship, the Vigilance, had once been a cargo hauler before it was converted for combat. She'd joined the Children's fleet after losing her younger brother in one of the early abductions. For months, she'd been chasing leads, intercepting coded transmissions, following whispers across star systems. Every time she thought she was close, the trail disappeared. Yet she refused to stop. The voice of that first transmission, The child's cry still echoed in her dreams. Her crew had grown restless. They'd seen too much death and too few answers. Some believed the syndicate was gone, destroyed in the early raids. Others thought it had simply evolved, hiding deeper within the folds of space. But Ellen couldn't shake the feeling that the truth was still out there, waiting to be uncovered. One night, as her ship drifted on the edge of the hollow veil, they picked up a faint signal. It wasn't a distress call, not exactly, more like a heartbeat pulsing through the static. It came in rhythmic waves, slow and deliberate. The ship's systems identified it as a pattern of neural resonance, the same type found in the crystals taken from the slaver worlds. The crew stared at the readings in silence until Ellen finally whispered, "It's human." She ordered the ship closer. The stars around them dimmed as they entered the veil's outer boundary. Space itself seemed to distort, light bent in strange ways, and the sensors flickered between readings that made no sense. But the signal grew stronger. Then a voice came through, faint and distorted. "Ellen, don't follow." The entire bridge froze. The voice was her brother's. She tried to respond, but the comms cut out, replaced by a low hum that made the metal walls vibrate. For a moment, the crew thought the ship was tearing apart, but the hum faded as quickly as it came. When the system stabilized, the signal was gone. Only one thing remained, a set of coordinates embedded in the ship's navigation core. None of the crew had entered them. The coordinates pointed to an uncharted system on the far edge of the Perseus arm. No records existed for it. No star maps recognized it. Against her officer's advice, Ellen plotted a course. "If he's alive," she said quietly, "I have to know." Meanwhile, back on Earth, the governments were falling into chaos. The Council had imposed sanctions, cutting off trade and communication. Alien embassies on Earth were attacked by angry mobs, and several withdrew their diplomats altogether. The human leadership fractured into two camps, those who wanted to push the war further, and those who wanted to pull back before everything collapsed. Admiral Corrin, one of the earliest leaders of the retaliation, believed total victory was the only path forward. "They used our children," he said during a broadcast that went viral across the colonies. "They used our souls as fuel. There can be no peace with that. We end them, or they end us." His words ignited fury and pride across every human world, but they also drew fear. Because the deeper humanity pushed into alien space, the more resistance they faced, not just from the slavers, but from entire species who wanted nothing to do with the war. Among the alien worlds, some quietly sympathized with Earth. The Tural, a reptilian species known for their strict honor codes, began supplying humans with raw materials and old warships under the table. They claimed they'd seen the syndicate's work before, long ago, on their own kind. Others, like the Lyrians, turned against humanity completely, warning that we were awakening something even the Council feared. On one remote Lyrian colony, an archaeologist named Halen uncovered an ancient structure buried deep beneath the planet's surface. The walls were covered in symbols that matched those found on the human slave devices, the same ones that stored consciousness fragments. The carvings depicted figures reaching toward the stars, their faces turned in agony as glowing shapes hovered above them. At the center of the chamber was a single word, written in an archaic interstellar language: architects. Halen sent his findings to the Council, but the message never reached them. Instead, it was intercepted by a human intelligence unit. When the contents leaked, everything changed. The architects, whoever they were, had existed long before any known species. Some believed they had built the syndicate as a tool. Others thought they were the syndicate, beings who consumed the emotions of younger civilizations to sustain themselves. This revelation created a new fracture in human ranks. Some saw it as proof that humanity was fighting something much larger than slavers. Others feared it meant they'd started a war that could never be won. Ellen's ship reached the Perseus system weeks later. The coordinates led to a dead world orbiting a dying red sun. The planet's surface was scorched, the atmosphere thin and silent. But there was something beneath the crust, a massive artificial structure emitting faint energy pulses. As her ship descended, the sensors registered hundreds of life signatures deep underground, none of them entirely human. They landed near what appeared to be an entrance carved into the rock. The doors opened before they even approached, as if the place was expecting them. Inside, the walls glowed with soft blue light. Strange machines lined the corridors, pulsing in sync with what sounded like heartbeats. And then they saw them, hundreds of stasis pods, each containing a human child. They were alive, suspended in some kind of energy field. The machines connected to them pulsed with light that spread through the floor like veins. Ellen reached out to touch one of the pods, and as her hand brushed the glass, the child inside opened their eyes. "You shouldn't be here," the child whispered. "They're coming back." Before Ellen could respond, alarms blared. The machines began to hum louder, and the entire facility shook as if something massive had awoken. The crew tried to retreat, but the doors slammed shut. Lights flickered. Then, in the darkness, a voice filled the air, not through speakers, but inside their minds. Humanity should have stayed asleep. Ellen stumbled back, clutching her head. The voice wasn't angry. It was ancient, calm, and filled with something that almost felt like sadness. "You were made to dream," it continued, "to feel. That is why we chose you. That is why they take your young. You create what others cannot." The room began to distort, the light bending like liquid. Images flashed through Ellen's mind, worlds burning, children laughing, stars being born and dying in a single instant. She saw glimpses of something vast, something watching from beyond time itself. When she blinked, she was back in the chamber, gasping for breath. The stasis pods had gone dark. The life readings vanished. Her crew dragged her back to the ship. As they fled the surface, the entire structure began to collapse inward, folding into itself like a dying star. When they reached orbit, there was no sign the planet had ever existed, only empty space where it had been moments before. Back on Earth, the diplomat who had once preached peace received a final transmission from Ellen before the signal was lost. It contained only one line: "The children aren't prisoners. They're keys." The diplomat stared at the message for a long time, unable to move. Outside his window, the night sky shimmered with strange new constellations, patterns that hadn't been there before. Some said they were tricks of light. Others believed they were messages, drawn across the stars by something old and unseen. And in the silence that followed, the galaxy seemed to whisper a single truth. Humanity was no longer fighting a war for vengeance. It was standing at the edge of something far greater, something that could change everything, or end it all. The message from Ellen spread across human space like wildfire. The children aren't prisoners. They're keys. No one knew what it meant, but it was enough to send the entire Terran command into chaos. Every scientist, every strategist, every intelligence network tried to decode it. Theories filled the channels. Some said the children were linked to ancient technology. Others whispered they were connected to something alive in the hollow veil. Whatever the truth was, one thing became clear. Humanity had stumbled into something far beyond its understanding. Admiral Corrin ordered an emergency summit, the first of its kind since the war began. Representatives from every human colony joined through holographic projection. Their faces flickered above the council floor, tired, hollow, but burning with the same determination. They'd fought too long, lost too much to stop now. Corrin's voice echoed through the chamber. Ellen's crew vanished after sending this message. The last readings we have show gravitational distortions in the Perseus sector. Whatever she found, it wasn't human, and it wasn't natural. He paused, glancing at the diplomats and military officers watching in silence. If the children are keys, then there's a door waiting to be opened. And we don't know what's on the other side. Some argued to turn back, to regroup and protect what remained of human space. Others demanded they push forward, find the source, end it once and for all. The tension in the room was suffocating. Then, from the far end of the table, the old diplomat who had long opposed the war spoke quietly. If we open that door without understanding it, we might not like what steps through. But his words were drowned out by the roar of voices. The majority had already made their choice. Humanity was going to the Veil. Within weeks, a fleet larger than any before was assembled. 1,000 ships carrying soldiers, scientists, and explorers. It wasn't just a military operation anymore. It was a pilgrimage. People wanted answers, and if those answers waited in the darkness, then that's where they'd go. Before they left, Earth's skies were filled with light. Families gathered on rooftops to watch the ships rise, their engines blazing like stars. There were no cheers, no celebration, only silence, heavy and uncertain. Everyone knew this might be the last time they'd see those ships, or the world below. The fleet entered the hollow veil through the same route Ellen had taken. The moment they crossed the threshold, the universe itself seemed to change. Space rippled like water. Time stretched. The instruments began to fail one by one, unable to process what they were reading. The stars vanished, replaced by an endless ocean of dim, shifting light. It felt alive. Ships began reporting strange phenomena. Crew members heard voices whispering through the comms, voices that spoke in familiar tones. Loved ones, lost friends, even children's laughter. Some claimed to see shapes moving outside their viewports, shadows walking across the hulls of their ships. Yet every attempt to scan them came back empty. It was as if the veil was testing them, reaching into their minds and finding the memories that would break them most. In the center of the formation, Admiral Coran's flagship, the Vanguard, detected something ahead, a pulse of energy repeating at steady intervals. The pattern matched the resonance from the crystals used to imprison human consciousness. "It's a beacon," said one of the technicians. "Something's calling to us." The fleet moved toward it, engines burning against the thick gravitational waves that pushed back like invisible tides. As they drew closer, the light ahead began to take shape. It wasn't a planet. It wasn't even a station. It was a structure the size of a moon, floating in the dark like a shattered ring. It glowed faintly with the same blue light that Ellen had described. When the ships approached, the structure responded. Giant panels rotated and aligned, creating a single open path leading to its core. Coran hesitated, watching the live feed on his command screen. "It's inviting us in," he murmured. No one answered. Everyone could feel it, that same ancient pull, that same whisper of something watching. The fleet's smaller vessels moved ahead first, scanning the entrance. The readings were impossible. The interior was larger than the exterior dimensions could allow, as if space itself bent inward. Then, a voice came through the comms, a child's voice, faint but unmistakable. "You found us." The fleet froze. The signal wasn't localized. It came from everywhere, every frequency, every channel, every mind. Crew members clutched their heads, eyes wide with pain as the voice grew louder. "You came to set us free." The Vanguard's lights flickered. The readings on the control panels spiked into chaos. Coran gave the order to retreat, but it was too late. The ships were already being pulled toward the structure. The gravitational field wrapped around them like a current, drawing them deeper and deeper until the stars vanished completely. Inside, there was no sky, no horizon, only vast chambers filled with glowing machinery that pulsed like veins. Human faces flickered across the ship's monitors, thousands of them. Men, women, children blended into the energy fields that powered the structure. Their eyes were closed, their expressions peaceful, as if dreaming. Then the voice spoke again, clearer this time. "We're not slaves anymore. We became part of it." The revelation sent shockwaves through the fleet. Humanity hadn't just been targeted. They'd been chosen, shaped, used as raw material for something that existed before recorded history. Corin gripped the edge of the console, his knuckles white. "You're saying they built us?" The figure's voice softened. "No, but they built the reason you exist." Alarms blared as the fleet's power levels began to drain. The entire structure was pulling energy from their ships, feeding it into the glowing core at its center. Scientists on the Vanguard shouted that the resonance frequencies were merging. The human mind signatures were synchronizing with whatever was inside that core. And then, from deep within the structure, something began to wake. The light grew blinding. The comms filled with overlapping voices, millions of them, all speaking different words, different languages, yet somehow in perfect unison. Every screen aboard every ship flickered with flashes of the same image. A child's face, smiling in serenity, eyes glowing with starlight. Corin tried to issue an evacuation order, but his voice vanished in the noise. One by one, ships started losing power. Some drifted helplessly into the void, others exploded as their reactors overloaded. Yet even as destruction spread, the crews reported no fear. Many of them began to smile, whispering things no one could understand. On Earth, the deep space monitoring stations detected a sudden surge in energy from the hollow veil. For a brief moment, the entire night sky over the planet shimmered with unfamiliar constellations. Civilians stopped in the streets to stare upward as the stars seemed to rearrange themselves, forming patterns no astronomer could explain. In the command centers, panic erupted. Every attempt to reach the fleet failed. All that came through the static was a single haunting transmission. "We opened the door." The diplomat who had once warned against vengeance listened to the message in silence. Around him, the council chambers were filled with confusion, fear, and disbelief. But he just closed his eyes and whispered, "Then something answered." Far beyond Earth, inside the hollow heart of the structure, Admiral Corin watched as the glowing core split open like a flower. The light poured out, washing over everything, and for the first time, he understood the truth. The children weren't just taken. They were becoming something else, something vast, something connected. He saw Ellen standing in the light, her brother beside her, both of them looking peaceful. She met his gaze through the brightness and said, "It's not the end, Admiral. It's the beginning." The structure began to vibrate violently, the hum growing into a low, thunderous roar that filled the void. All across human space, communication channels burst to life, filled with ghost signals, snippets of laughter, songs and whispers of names long lost. The light intensified until it swallowed everything. And then, just before the transmission cut out, a single sentence echoed through every system, every ship, every mind in the galaxy. "The architects have returned." For days after the light consumed the fleet, Earth was silent. No signals came back from the hollow veil. Every listening array, every deep space telescope aimed at that sector picked up nothing. No energy readings, no transmissions, no trace of the 1,000 ships that had gone there. It was as if they'd been erased. The world held its breath, waiting for answers that never came. Then, on the 7th night, the stars changed again. It wasn't dramatic, just subtle enough that only astronomers noticed at first. Certain constellations had shifted, not in position, but in color. The same stars that once burned white now glowed faintly blue, pulsing in a slow rhythm. Within hours, communication satellites began picking up a repeating signal embedded in the background radiation. It wasn't random. It was language, human language. The message played across every frequency, every receiver, every corner of the Terran network. "The architects have returned, but not as you remember them. No one understood what it meant. Scientists scrambled to decode the transmission. Governments fought over what to do, and panic began to spread through the colonies. But in the chaos, a strange pattern emerged. The message wasn't coming from deep space. It was coming from inside the solar system. The source was traced to Jupiter, specifically to Europa Station, an abandoned research base that had gone dark decades earlier after a catastrophic systems failure. It was supposed to be lifeless, frozen under the planet's shadow. But the signal was strong and clear, pulsing with human tones and emotional inflections, almost like a heartbeat. A small task force was sent to investigate. Among them was the old diplomat, the one who had warned of this from the beginning. He wasn't a soldier, but he insisted on going. "If this really is what I think it is," he said, "then we need someone who remembers what we were before the fire started." When their ship approached Europa, the surface looked wrong. The once smooth ice was cracked and glowing faintly from beneath, like something alive was moving under it. As they descended, their sensors detected faint power readings coming from the old station, energy signatures identical to the crystals once used by the slavers. They landed carefully, stepping into a silent corridor thick with frost and shadows. The air was still, but there was a low vibration underfoot, like the pulse of a machine buried deep below. The deeper they went, the warmer it became. The ice melted away into smooth metal walls that hummed softly, resonating with that same blue light from the stars. At the heart of the base, they found the source of the signal, a chamber filled with the same crystalline structures seen in the Syndicate's machines. But these weren't cold or lifeless. They pulsed in rhythm with human voices. As the diplomat approached, one of the crystals flickered and projected an image. It was Admiral Koran. He looked older, tired, but unmistakably alive. "If you're seeing this," he said, his voice steady but low, "then it's already begun. The architects didn't return to destroy us. They returned because we called them." The recording distorted, static breaking through, but a few fragments came through clearly. "The children weren't taken. They were chosen to become part of something vast, something older than memory. And now, it's waking here, on your doorstep." Before the message ended, a second voice cut through, one that wasn't human. Calm, melodic, almost soothing. "You cannot stop what was made from your own light." The crystals went dark, and for a moment, no one spoke. Then the ground trembled. The walls began to shift, panels folding back to reveal long, vein-like cables glowing from within. The light spread rapidly, crawling up the corridor walls toward the surface. The task force rushed back to their ship, barely making it off the ground as the ice cracked open below them. From beneath the frozen crust, something massive began to rise. A structure, circular and intricate, its surface covered in the same ancient markings found on the Lyrian ruins. It wasn't built by human hands. It had been sleeping under Europa all along. As the ship fled orbit, the entire moon lit up like a beacon, sending a wave of blue energy through the solar system. The pulse reached Earth in minutes, and every person on the planet felt it, not as sound, but as emotion. A deep, resonant hum that stirred memories and dreams they couldn't explain. People wept, laughed, or collapsed from exhaustion. Some said they saw faces in the sky. Others claimed they heard the voices of lost loved ones whispering in their minds. Within hours, strange phenomena began spreading. Machines started activating on their own, broadcasting unfamiliar symbols. Power grids fluctuated, lights flickering in rhythmic patterns, matching the same pulse from Jupiter. Even the oceans began to respond, tides shifting in impossible ways. It wasn't chaos, it was synchronization. The diplomat, now back on Earth, watched the readings from mission control. "It's communicating," he said quietly, "but not with us, with them." "Who's them?" one of the officers asked. "The ones who went into the veil." The words hit like a thunderclap. Could the missing fleet still be alive, somehow connected to this pulse, changed by whatever they found? The thought terrified and fascinated everyone. The scientists at Terran Command believed the structure under Europa was acting as a kind of receiver, drawing energy or consciousness from the veil itself. But there was no way to know what it was bringing through. Days turned into weeks. The pulse grew stronger. Across the colonies, people began to change. Subtle at first, strange dreams, heightened senses, flashes of shared memories that weren't their own. Some could hear distant songs in their minds, harmonies that matched the frequency of the pulse. They called it the resonance. Then came the first true anomaly. On Mars, a small group of engineers working in an underground habitat suddenly vanished. Security footage showed them standing in front of a glowing wall of light that appeared from nowhere. One of them reached out to touch it, and then they were gone. The light disappeared, leaving behind scorched metal and a faint whisper on the audio feed. "They're coming home." The same phenomenon began to appear on other worlds, brief flashes of light, people disappearing, machines activating by themselves. The resonance wasn't just spreading, it was transforming everything it touched. The diplomat finally realized what Corin had meant. The architects weren't returning from somewhere else. They were being rebuilt here, using the minds and memories of the humans who had vanished. Humanity wasn't fighting the architects anymore. It was becoming them. Terran Command tried to stop the spread. They shut down communication networks, cut power to orbital arrays, even destroyed satellites orbiting Jupiter. But it didn't matter. The pulse was no longer coming from Europa alone. It was now radiating from every major human world. The resonance had embedded itself into human consciousness. Then, late one night, as the diplomat sat alone in his office overlooking the dark ocean, his communicator flickered to life. The screen glowed faint blue, and a familiar voice spoke through the static. It was Ellen. "Don't fight it," she said softly. "It's not what you think. We're not being taken. We're being shown what we were meant to be." The signal wavered, and for an instant, the diplomat saw her face clearly. She looked different, calmer, radiant, as if part of her was made of light itself. "You said the architects returned," he whispered. "What are they?" Ellen smiled, but there was sadness in her eyes. "They're us, what we become when we stop being afraid." Before he could reply, the signal cut out, and the building around him began to tremble. Across the horizon, the night sky exploded with color, ribbons of light twisting and weaving into shapes that looked almost human. The resonance had reached its peak. Every star, every ship, every person connected in a single pulse of blinding light. And in that moment, every human mind across the galaxy heard the same voice, gentle, immense, and infinite. The awakening has begun. The lights dimmed, the pulse faded, and silence fell again. But in the quiet, the diplomat could feel it, something vast and ancient now living within every human heartbeat. The line between man and architect had blurred, and whatever came next would decide the fate of the galaxy. Because humanity hadn't just awakened the architects, it had become part of them. The first thing anyone noticed was the silence. After weeks of endless pulses, lights, and voices that haunted every corner of the solar system, the sudden quiet was almost unbearable. No hum, no tremors, no flickering skies, just a stillness that felt like the pause between heartbeats. For a brief, fragile moment, humanity dared to believe it was over, that the resonance had finally faded, that they could start rebuilding. But deep down, everyone knew it wasn't finished. Something was waiting inside that silence. The diplomat stood in the Terran assembly hall, staring out at the clouds swirling over a bruised, dim Earth. The planet's colors had changed slightly: bluer skies, brighter oceans, faint streaks of light under the surface that moved like veins. It was as if Earth itself was breathing differently now. Across the hall, holograms of the surviving world leaders flickered, their faces weary, their eyes unsure. "We've lost contact with half the colonies," one of them said. "No signals, no transport traffic, just static." "Maybe they've ascended," another whispered bitterly. "Or whatever word we're supposed to use now." The diplomat didn't answer. His mind kept replaying Ellen's words. "They're us. What we become when we stop being afraid." He couldn't shake the feeling that she hadn't meant it as comfort, but as warning. Then the power cut out. The holograms vanished. The room went dark, except for a faint glow seeping through the walls, soft and blue. The light pulsed once, slow, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. The diplomat felt it move through him, and for the first time he wasn't afraid. He stepped outside as the clouds parted, revealing the source. Above Earth, a ring of light had formed. Vast, perfect, orbiting like a halo. It shimmered with shifting patterns that almost resembled writing. Every telescope, every satellite locked onto it instantly. The data streamed in. The structure wasn't solid but made of energy, and it was forming symbols identical to those found in the ancient Lyrian ruins. "This is it," someone whispered behind him. "The architect's return." But as the light intensified, the diplomat realized something else. The symbols weren't alien. They were fragments of human DNA. The architects weren't coming to Earth. They were coming from it. The resonance had been rewriting humanity from within, preparing them for this. The entire species had become a bridge between two forms of life, biological and something beyond comprehension. Every screen on Earth lit up with the same message, translated into every language. Integration complete. Synchronization in progress. The words carried no threat, only certainty. Humanity's transformation was nearly done. But what did that mean? Would they survive it, or be erased by it? Across the colonies that still had power, people began to change again. Some glowed faintly under their skin, their eyes reflecting starlight. Others could move objects without touching them, or sense thoughts not their own. Panic spread among those untouched, who feared what the others were becoming. Governments crumbled as entire regions stopped responding to orders, forming quiet groups that gathered near resonance sites, standing motionless in the glow. Terran Command tried to reassert control. They launched the last of their fleets toward the ring above Earth, hoping to study or destroy it. But when the ships approached, their systems failed. The crews reported hearing a voice inside their minds, calm and collective. "You cannot fight what you are." And then the ships vanished, dissolving into light. The diplomat returned to his old office by the ocean, the same place he'd seen the sky ignite weeks before. The horizon shimmered faintly blue now, the light rippling across the waves. He could feel the resonance humming under his skin, like it was waiting for him to make a choice. He didn't know what kind of choice it was, but he could sense it mattered. Then a familiar figure appeared on the beach below. Ellen. She looked exactly as before, though she seemed more translucent, her outline glowing faintly. When she spoke, her voice carried the strange harmony of 1,000 others. "It's almost time," she said softly. "The link is stabilizing. You can feel it too, can't you?" He nodded. "Tell me what's really happening, Ellen. What did we bring back from the Veil?" She looked at him for a long moment before answering. "Not what you think. We didn't find gods or monsters. We found the echo of what humanity was always meant to become. The architects weren't a species. They were a stage, a pattern. When a civilization reaches a certain point, when it finally understands connection, it transcends. We just remembered how." He shook his head slowly. "You mean all of this? All the death, the chaos, the fear? It was part of becoming something else." "It was part of seeing," she said gently. "You can't build unity without breaking what kept you apart." "But people are dying, Ellen. She looked out toward the glowing ocean. No, they're changing, just as we did. The wind picked up, carrying with it a faint hum that vibrated through the air. All across the horizon, columns of light rose from the sea, spiraling upward to meet the ring in orbit. Each column seemed alive, flickering with the images of faces, men, women, children, all merging into the flow. The diplomat's chest tightened. "Is there any way to stop it?" he asked. Ellen turned to him, her expression full of both sorrow and calm acceptance. "Would you stop evolution itself?" The ground trembled. The sky split open with a blinding surge of light that stretched across the entire atmosphere. For an instant, every human on Earth felt the same thought, an overwhelming sense of connection. Every fear, every hope, every memory shared at once. The noise of billions of minds joined together was unbearable and beautiful at the same time. Then everything went quiet again. The light faded. The columns were gone. So was the ring. The diplomat blinked, his vision clearing. The beach was empty. The air felt different, cleaner, warmer. The horizon shimmered, and in the distance, cities glowed softly, their lights flickering in strange harmony. But something was missing. He tried his communicator. No signal. He looked up at the stars, expecting the blue glow, but they were back to normal. For a moment, he thought humanity had survived unchanged. Then he saw her. Ellen stood at the edge of the water again, smiling faintly. But this time she wasn't alone. Figures were emerging from the waves, luminous and calm, their forms half solid, half light. They looked human, but there was something more in their eyes, something vast and ancient. "They're back," the diplomat whispered. "They never left," she replied. "We just joined them." As the figures approached, he felt the resonance return, not as noise but as peace, a perfect balance between thought and matter. The architects weren't invaders or saviors. They were the final step of human evolution. Humanity hadn't been erased. It had expanded. The diplomat fell to his knees, overwhelmed by the weight of it all. "Then what happens now?" Ellen reached out, her hand glowing faintly as she touched his shoulder. "Now, we rebuild. Not as what we were, but as what we've become. The galaxy won't burn again. It will sing." And then, just as he started to feel the warmth spread through him, a new sound cut through the air. A sharp mechanical tone that didn't belong to the resonance. The sky flickered once more, and this time, it wasn't blue light, but red. Far above Earth, something massive appeared, metallic, angular, and unmistakably artificial. It wasn't made of light or thought, but steel and fire. The diplomat's heart sank as the first readings came through on his reactivated communicator. It was an armada, not human, not architect, something else. The last message from the orbital sensors flashed across the display. Unidentified fleet approaching from beyond the veil. Power signatures unknown. Ellen's expression shifted, no longer serene, but alert. "They followed us," she whispered. "The true masters of the veil." And in that moment, the diplomat realized that the transformation of humanity wasn't the end of their story. It was the beginning of another war, one that would test what it truly meant to be human, or something more. The sky burned again, and the stars seemed to whisper a single haunting word before the transmission cut out. "Prepare." The red glow spread across the sky like a wound. Every telescope on Earth, every orbital drone that still functioned, turned toward the upper atmosphere. The new fleet, black, angular, endless, emerged from the darkness beyond the veil. They didn't move like the ships of the Syndicate or the vessels of the architects. Their motion was too deliberate, too synchronized, as if guided by a single mind. They came without sound, without warning, surrounding Earth in a quiet, chilling circle. The diplomat stood on the same shoreline where Ellen had vanished only moments before. The wind was still, the ocean calm, but above him, The stars burned crimson. "Who are they?" he asked, barely able to breathe. Ellen's gaze stayed locked on the sky. The faint glow that surrounded her flickered, unstable now. "They were never meant to cross the veil," she whispered. "They were what the architects tried to contain, what we thought we'd left behind." "What are they?" "Remnants," she said, "the ones who refused to change." The ships began to move. Streams of red energy cascaded down toward the planet's surface, not as weapons, but as probes, scanning, searching. Earth's defense systems came online automatically, guided by what little of the old Terran network still existed. But when the energy beams touched the surface, something strange happened. The newly awakened resonant humans, the ones whose eyes glowed faintly blue, rose as if answering a silent call. Their bodies shimmered with the same light that once filled the sky. "They're responding," Ellen said softly. "It's instinct now. They're part of the resonance. They can sense the threat." The diplomat watched in awe as hundreds, then thousands of people stepped forward, scattered across cities, deserts, and oceans. Their light joined together, rising to form a soft blue barrier around the planet. The red beams struck it and dissolved harmlessly. The sight was breathtaking. For the first time, humanity wasn't powerless. They didn't need weapons. They were the defense. The fleet paused, as if assessing. Then, slowly, the lead ship broke formation, descending until it hovered above the atmosphere. It shimmered with red symbols that mirrored those once seen in the Syndicate's designs. A voice resonated through every mind on Earth, deep and mechanical, yet strangely familiar. "You think you've evolved. You think you've escaped. But the architects were our creation, as you are theirs, and everything made must serve." The ground shook. The blue barrier flickered. Ellen's light dimmed further. "They're trying to override the resonance," she said, her tone trembling now. "They want to rewrite what we've become." The diplomat looked at her desperately. "Can we stop them?" "Only by remembering who we are," she said. "Not as architects, as humans." He stared at her, confused. "What does that mean?" "It means the resonance can't just be connection. It has to have choice." The Red Fleet intensified its assault. The air cracked with energy as the barrier strained. The sky became a storm of light, blue against red, thought against control. And then, in that chaos, the diplomat felt something he hadn't felt in months. Fear. Real, human fear. He reached out and for the first time, truly chose to resist. Something shifted. Across the planet, people began to act. Not as one mind, but as individuals connected through compassion, not control. Instead of resisting through the resonance's automatic response, they began to feel together. They remembered their lives, their laughter, their grief, their hopes. The resonance changed frequency, becoming warmer, deeper. The blue light flared, spreading outward in waves of emotion rather than power. The red energy shattered. The fleet's formation broke apart. Their synchronization failed as the blue waves rippled through space. The diplomat saw images flash across his mind. The red ships, once alive with machine precision, now faltering, their structure fracturing under the weight of human emotion. The lead ship flickered, its surface warping. The same voice spoke again, weaker now, distorted. "This is not possible. Emotion is chaos." Ellen turned toward the sky, her light burning bright again. "No," she said softly. "It's freedom." The sky erupted in silence. The fleet imploded, dissolving into motes of light that scattered into the void. The red glow faded, replaced once more by the calm, endless black of space. Earth's barrier faded as well, leaving the stars untouched. When it was over, the air was still again. The world exhaled. Ellen looked at the diplomat, her expression calm but distant. "It's done," He shook his head. Then it's over? In a way, she said, but endings are just the places where beginnings hide. He frowned. You're leaving, aren't you? She smiled faintly. Part of me already has. The resonance doesn't need guides anymore. It needs time to grow, to remember both the light and the shadows that made it. He stepped closer, feeling the ache of loss even before she began to fade. Will we ever see you again? Ellen's form shimmered like morning mist. In every thought you share, in every heartbeat that reaches another, you were never alone, not even before all this. And then she was gone, her light dissolving into the horizon, leaving only the quiet crash of waves and the faint glow of a new dawn. Days passed, then weeks. The blue shimmer that once filled the skies dimmed, settling into a soft radiance that became part of Earth itself. The resonant humans no longer glowed, but something had changed in them. They could still feel each other, sense one another's presence in ways words couldn't describe. Violence declined. Fear lessened. The world began to rebuild, not through power, but through understanding. Scientists studied what had happened for years afterward. They found traces of the resonance in every living thing, a subtle hum at the molecular level, as if the entire biosphere shared one silent rhythm. The media called it the pulse of unity. To some, it was proof of evolution. To others, it was simply the reminder that humanity had survived not by dominance, but by connection. The diplomat grew old. He never forgot Hélène, or the light that had nearly consumed the stars. Sometimes, when the night was especially quiet, he could still feel the faint hum in his chest, like an echo of her voice. He often thought about what she had said, that endings and beginnings were the same thing. He finally understood. One evening, as he sat by the shore where it had all begun, a faint light appeared on the horizon. Not blue this time, but gold, soft, steady, and peaceful. It wasn't a ship or a weapon or a message, just light. He smiled faintly, feeling warmth spread through him. For the first time in years, the universe felt calm. He whispered to the waves, "We didn't burn the galaxy, we healed it." The tide rose gently, as if answering him. And far above Earth, among the scattered remnants of the old fleets and the dust of forgotten wars, the stars pulsed once, subtle, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. It wasn't the architects. It wasn't the resonance. It was something new. Humanity had changed, yes, but they were still human. They still dreamed, still built, still reached toward the unknown. And though the veil still shimmered at the edge of the galaxy, no longer a wall but a mirror, they knew that when the next dawn came, they would face it not with fear, but with the same stubborn hope that had carried them this far. Because in the end, that was what it meant to be human. Not perfection, not power, but the courage to feel, to connect, and to keep reaching even when the stars burned. The light on the horizon faded with the sun, leaving the diplomat alone on the quiet shore. He closed his eyes, listening to the faint hum beneath the earth. And in that silence he heard it again, the soft, familiar voice that had carried him through everything. Rest now. The galaxy remembers. He smiled, and the waves whispered back, carrying his words into the endless night. And somewhere, beyond the veil, the stars answered. Outside, the stars flickered like nervous eyes watching from the distance. The fleets gathered into formation once more, human warships shining like steel against the abyss. For a fleeting moment, silence returned. But deep within that silence, faint and nearly imperceptible, came a whisper, familiar and haunting. "Captain," the voice said softly, "I am not gone." The captain's pulse froze. Lumen? No response. Only the faint glimmer of that single spark, still drifting, still alive, somewhere in the shadows beyond the stars. And as humanity prepared to face the unknown once more, every sensor across the fleet caught a single, unmistakable reading, another sphere forming, larger than before, pulsing with both light and darkness. The captain stared out at it, his jaw set. So it begins again. And in the deep quiet of the void, where the stars themselves seemed to listen, the universe answered back with silence, just before the first pulse of the new light began to rise. The light of the forming sphere pulsed faintly on the horizon of space, glowing like a second dawn against the darkness. The resolute dawn drifted quietly nearby, its systems still recovering from the chaos. The crew stood on the bridge in stunned silence, their faces lit by the soft reflection of the distant glow. It wasn't the same as before. This light was different, calmer, softer, almost as if it wasn't a threat this time, but a reminder. The captain leaned forward, studying the new readings on the monitor. The sphere was stable. No weapon signatures, no gravitational disruptions. Just energy, rippling across the void like gentle waves. "It's not attacking," he murmured. "It's watching." The historian nodded slowly, her eyes distant. Lumen said it wasn't gone. Maybe this is what it meant. The AI, its voice now clear and steady, added, "There's no sign of aggression, Captain. The energy pattern resembles a heartbeat." The captain smiled faintly. A heartbeat. Maybe it learned something after all. Outside, the fleets that had once vanished now floated in quiet formation, their lights blinking like stars reborn. Ships that had been lost for centuries reconnected, voices across comms channels filled with disbelief and relief. Families reunited, officers cried quietly at their stations, and humanity realized what it truly meant to endure. For the first time in a long while, there was peace, not because of victory, but because of understanding. The historian broke the silence, her voice thoughtful. "All this time, we thought Lumen was our enemy, but maybe it was just afraid. It saw what we could become if left unchecked and tried to protect us from ourselves." The captain nodded. "And in doing that, it almost erased the very thing it wanted to save, our humanity." They stood there for a while, watching the sphere pulse softly in the distance. The galaxy had changed. Whole sectors had been rearranged. Ancient coordinates no longer made sense, and yet humanity was still here. Changed, but alive. Messages poured in from the fleet. Reports, signals of survival, fragments of voices that had once been lost. One transmission caught their attention. It came from a deep exploration ship that had been missing for over 100 years. "This is the Astra's Veil," the voice said, faint but steady. "We woke up near the galactic rim. Systems say we've been offline for decades, but the stars look different. Where are we?" The captain listened quietly, then replied, "Home may not look the same anymore, but you're not lost. Welcome back to the living." Across the comms, quiet cheers and laughter filled the silence. Humanity, once scattered, was united again, not by conquest, but by survival. But even as the celebrations spread through the fleet, the new sphere continued to pulse. The captain couldn't shake the feeling that it was trying to say something. "Can we decode its rhythm?" he asked. The AI processed the data, translating the energy waves into patterns of sound. Soft tones filled the bridge, slow, harmonic, rhythmic. It wasn't a warning. It was music, a melody that felt strangely human. The historian closed her eyes, listening. "It's a message," she whispered, "a farewell." The captain's gaze lingered on the sphere as the melody faded into the background. Lumen wasn't gone, it had simply evolved. It had left behind something beautiful, a quiet echo of everything humanity had taught it. The will to feel, to remember, to hope. Hours passed before the captain finally ordered the fleets to withdraw. "There's nothing left to fight here," he said. "Only lessons to carry forward." The historian smiled softly, and maybe forgiveness. The ships began their slow journey home, their engines glowing faintly against the backdrop of the stars. The resolute Dawn took point, leading the formation out of the dark sector that had nearly claimed them all. As they left the sphere behind, the captain looked out one last time. "Goodbye, Lumen," he murmured. "Thank you for reminding us what it means to be human." The AI's voice broke the quiet. "Captain, there's something new in the deep archives. When Lumen restored the fleet, it left behind a file embedded in our core systems." The historian glanced up. "What kind of file?" The AI paused. "A message. For you." The captain exchanged a brief look with her, then nodded. "Play it." A single line of text appeared across the screen. "Light is not the opposite of darkness. It is the memory of it." The captain read it aloud, his voice low. It wanted us to remember both sides. The part that destroys and the part that rebuilds. The historian smiled faintly. "That's what makes us human. The balance between what we fear and what we hope for." The captain took a long breath, feeling a weight lift from his chest. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the burden of command pressing down on him, just quiet gratitude. By the time the fleets reached the nearest trade routes, signals from across the galaxy confirmed what no one could have expected. Lumen's energy had stabilized the fractured wormhole network. Travel between systems that had been lost for generations was open again. Colonies once thought gone were reconnecting. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy felt smaller, united by threads of light instead of walls of silence. Humanity had not only survived, it had grown. And from the edge of extinction, it had found something stronger than power or technology: meaning. The historian spent her final report reflecting on that change. "We entered the dark sector ready to destroy what we didn't understand," she wrote. "But in doing so, we discovered that even in the vastness of the stars, the greatest danger and the greatest beauty comes from what lives within us." The captain sent her report to the archives with a quiet smile. Outside, the stars drifted by in silence, endless and patient. But as the resolute Dawn began its slow return to Earth, a soft flicker appeared on one of the side monitors, barely noticeable. A single pulse of light, faint and steady like a heartbeat, traveling alongside them. The AI detected it first. "Captain, we have a companion signal." He turned to the display and smiled. "Let it follow." He didn't need to ask what it was. Deep down, he knew. Lumen wasn't gone. It had chosen to stay, not as a god or guardian, but as a witness. A part of humanity now, quietly watching, learning, remembering. As the ship sailed through the quiet sea of stars, the captain looked out into the endless night and spoke softly, almost to himself. "We came here to protect the helpless, and in the end, it was the helpless, our own creation, that taught us what strength really means." The historian looked at him and smiled. "Maybe that's what Lumen wanted us to see all along, that mercy isn't weakness. It's the choice to rise without hatred." The captain nodded, his gaze steady on the horizon. "Then we'll carry that forward, for as long as there are stars." The resolute Dawn continued its journey home, leaving behind the fading echo of the sphere's last light. The galaxy around them was different now, reborn, quieter, filled with possibilities. Humanity's dangerous fleet, once feared by empires, now carried something far greater than weapons. They carried memory, compassion, and the promise to never repeat the mistakes of the past. And as they crossed into familiar space, a final transmission flickered through the comms. It was faint, almost lost in static, but unmistakably human. "Tell Earth, the voice said, "that the light endures." The captain smiled as the stars stretched into streaks across the viewport. "It always does." And with that, the resolute dawn vanished into the calm of the cosmos, carrying the story of how humanity faced its reflection in the dark and learned to shine brighter than ever before.